Howdy y'all. Today I want to talk about a game called Windbound coming out later this month on August 28th for PS4, Xbox One, PC, Stadia, and the Switch. Found a cool article on it about GameSpot. Let's get into it. Today's article comes from Edmund Trand. Excuse me. Thank you, Edmund. Windbound isn't the Zelda copycat it looks like. A seafaring survival roguelike game lies beneath the surface of Windbound's attractive, albeit very Breath of the Wild presentation, but can stand out on its own terms. Honestly, it was the look at the game that caught my eye. My first thought was, wow, a Legend of Zelda-like game on PS4? Count me in. So I decided to look in to try to find some more info, and it honestly looks like there's some more going on than I initially thought. Look at a screenshot of Windbound, and its art direction, a vibrant watercolor style, will likely remind you of a very well-loved Legend of Zelda game, Breath of the Wild. Watch a video of Windbound in action, and seeing its focus on sailing through vast oceans might instead remind you of another Legend of Zelda game, Wind Waker. Actually start playing Windbound, however, and it's quickly very clear that despite those stylistic influences, it plays nothing like a Legend of Zelda game, which is honestly a relief. Excited to know that it's very much its own thing and doesn't just copy and paste from Breath of the Wild, even though it does have a similar art style, but that's really nothing to complain about. Windbound is the second release from Live Studios, a team of Australian developers who previously released Satellite Reigns, a spiritual successor to the much-loved Syndicate games. Neither of those games are like Windbound either. Windbound is a third-person survival game, the kind where resource gathering and crafting tools and supplies to stay alive are the main concerns that dominate the second-to-second gameplay loop. These things are very popular, I hear. And myself, I really love a good survival game, and so a survival mixed with a good story, and, I like the sound of the sailing, so let's see what they got to say about that. Windbound structures its survival as a single-player roguelite, much like Don't Starve. I've never played roguelite. If you have, Don't Starve rather. I've never played that. So if you have, let me know down in the comments and let me know what you think some of the similarities might be. You start the game as a woman named Kara who is shipwrecked and separated from her clan. She wakes up on a tiny island which barely has enough resources for you to build a basic canoe to row your way out of there. From there, your goal is to head towards the next procedurally generated landmass that makes up Windbound's archipelagic world and hopefully find a way back to your people. So in this screenshot, you get an excellent look at the art style. It really does look a lot like Breath of the Wild with the watercolor style shading. But I'm really digging how the light of the moon reflects off the glow of the fire. Looks like she might have hunted something here to cook. There's the first look at the boat back there. Pretty basic here, but you get a good look at what the game kind of really feels like. Procedurally generated is exciting because that means there's possibly endless variety and possibly endless amounts of landmass to explore. I know a lot of games do this nowadays. Borderlands 3 does it with the guns and comes up with, I think, a few billion different combinations of guns and weapons to use. And No Man's Sky actually uses procedural generation to create an entire universe for you to explore. That in itself is also very similar in the fact that it's a survival game, crafting, hoarding resources, that sort of thing. So I'm wondering if there's any similarities to that here other than the procedural generation. The next island, in all likelihood, will contain more resources that will allow you to keep Kara fed, as well as start building out her boat into something a little more efficient. Maybe something a little more robust, too, in order to survive the increasingly treacherous water hazards that will likely come up later. The boat building system allows for some creativity in how you want to put together your craft. I was able to eventually add multiple decks, sails, and defensive spikes to create a pretty big if slapdash vessel. Once I had a respectable boat on my hands, catching the wind in my sails and cruising across the ocean felt pretty good. Relaxing even. So it almost seems like upgrading your boat and getting it to sail is almost sort of a reward, the sailing in itself, where you finally get a moment to breathe, not having to worry so much about gathering. You can kind of set things up to cook automatically for you and just kick back while you wait to get to your next destination. You can even install a cooking station and a number of storage containers on it and get things done while your boat heads toward the next location. So I'm wondering if you'll also be able to add maybe armor crafting stations or weapon crafting or any other sort of things on the boat and pretty much have like a mobile fortress, especially as you get up to more and more levels. Here we've got the first 30 minutes. We're not going to watch that here, but I'll link it down in the description if y'all would like to check that out. The game looks really good. And this video here is a good way to really get an idea of what it's going for. Windbound is also being pitched as a survival game with a supposed provocative narrative. I wasn't able to get a sense of all that during the limited time of my demo session, but noted that the game was divided into a total of 5 chapters with an overarching goal for each. If you happen to die, you start all the way back in chapter 1 with most of your gear wiped. Okay, so it really is a roguelite. When you die, you go all the way back to pretty much the beginning of the game. I'm sure you'll have some of your better gear, but not everything. The segmentation of the game is an interesting variation, and it makes sense if the game has a hefty story to tell and characters to develop. The game does also feature a storyteller difficulty setting that supposedly makes the roguelite elements of Windbound less severe, and creates checkpoints at the beginning of each chapter. All of that certainly has the potential to make the daunting prospect of actually finishing a survival roguelite game feel a little more pleasable. Okay, that's cool. Different little option to take some of the stress off if you really just want to explore and experience the game and the story, and not so much worry about having to survive so much. And having more checkpoints is really going to help a lot. And let me know, are you going to try storyteller mode, or are you just going to stick with the regular brutal survival difficulty? Tell me down in the comments. I know I'll probably just stick with the regular survival difficulty. I love a good survival game. Excuse me. Of course, survival games need good threats to keep you juggling your priorities at all times, and Windbound certainly has that. Vicious oceans aside, islands can be populated with aggressive wildlife of all shapes and sizes, and a lot of them much bigger than Kara. You have the ability to sneak past them if necessary, but taking them head-on naturally yields rare materials you need for advanced recipes, as well as meat to eat provided you cook it before it spoils. Okay, so that says a lot of the materials and obviously food is going to go bad, so I wonder if cooking it will make it stay fresh longer. Maybe you can preserve it somehow. I'm wondering if the weapons and armor are going to break, maybe degrade to some degree. Kara is thankfully equipped with an unbreakable knife she can use as a default weapon, but naturally you can craft stronger melee weapons with the materials you find, as well as ranged weapons like a sling and bow. The ability to dodge attacks and the need to watch Kara's stamina meter adds to the concerns you need to keep in mind, but combat otherwise felt quite straightforward in my short time with it. I couldn't see any immediate avenues for complexity other than creating more powerful gear. Shooting Kara's bow may evoke those great Breath of the Wild combat moments, but Windbound's core focus is definitely more on survival. Okay, right here it says she has an unbreakable knife as a default weapon, so that means right there the other weapons will break. And I'm sure you'll be able to find ways to make them last longer, upgrade their durability, or at least make better ones that are, at least going to do more damage before they break. Don't Starve was one of the specific influences cited in Windbound's development, and having played a lot of that game, Windbound definitely seems to capture Clay's particular brand of survival loop quite closely, albeit with its own twists. Between that and the pleasing art style, which also echoes another game quite closely, Breath of the Wild, which we've talked about. Myself, I put about 400 hours into that game. I really, really loved it a lot. I bought a Switch just to play that game and couldn't get enough of it. Pretty much did everything you could want to do in that game. So when I saw this one and it had a similar art style, sort of similar combat, I was really interested right away. And then to find out that it's really more of a survival game really hooked me in, and I'm interested to see just how deep the survival mechanics go, as well as how much variety is in the world, because procedural generation usually can get pretty stale, but it has a good art style with a cool environment. I'm really digging the forest look with the water and the flowing grass, and hopefully that'll keep it from getting too stale too fast and give us a nice area to really explore and try to survive in. Between that and the pleasing art style, which it's enough to make me interested enough to play at least a little more. Whether the survival loop continues to vigorously keep your mind racing past the 2-hour mark is an unknown factor, as is how much Windbound's purported focus on telling a narrative and supposed personal journey actually comes into play. If it can build and balance the telling of a strong directed narrative within a genre that has almost always been associated purely with emergent player-driven storytelling, that would certainly make it special. Windbound isn't the Zelda copycat it may initially appear to be, but I'm hoping that it has its own unique identity to reveal too. Windbound is slated for release on PC, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Google Stadia on August 28th, 2020. A really fun looking survival game. Wanted to go over it, get some more info on it, try to start building some hype. One I'm really looking forward to. Hopefully the difficulty curve isn't too extreme and it doesn't get stale too fast with the procedural generation. Anyway, if you liked what you saw, think about hitting the like button, maybe subscribe if you want. If you didn't like what you saw, I appreciate you stopping in and chatting some games with us. Anyway, you're beautiful. Stay true to yourself.